Hey warriors, there's a river that flows through the mountains. You can't hear it from the road, you can't see it from the valley, but it's there, carving through stone, reshaping the landscape, creating canyons that will exist for millions of years. It doesn't announce itself, it doesn't ask permission. It simply flows, relentless and unstoppable, doing its work in the hidden places where no eye watches and no voice cheers. You are that river, or at least you could be. But somewhere along the way, we learned to perform our lives instead of living them. We learned to broadcast our intentions before we've taken a single step. We learned that the announcement feels almost as good as the achievement, so we stopped halfway, satisfied with the appearance of progress while the actual work remains undone. Heraclitus, the ancient Greek philosopher whose ideas deeply influenced Stoicism, said, "Nature loves to hide." He watched the world and saw that the most powerful forces operate beneath the surface. Seeds germinate in darkness. Mountains form under unseen pressure. Stars are born in clouds of dust where no light penetrates. Power accumulates in secret before it manifests in reality. But we've built a culture that demands the opposite. Share your journey, post your progress, document every step, let everyone into your process. And while transparency has its place, while community has value, we've confused visibility with validity. We've started to believe that if no one sees us working, the work doesn't count. Here's what that belief costs you. Your focus fragments into 1,000 pieces scattered across the minds of everyone you've told. Your energy, which should be concentrated like a laser on your goal, instead disperses like light through a prism, pretty but powerless. Your conviction, which should be hardening like steel in a forge, stays soft and malleable, shaped by every opinion that touches it. Epictetus would tell his students, "Don't explain your philosophy, embody it." He wasn't teaching them to be mysterious. He was teaching them that talk is cheap, that words without action are just noise, that the gap between what we say we'll do and what we actually do is where most dreams go to die. This gap has never been wider than it is today. We live in an age of infinite announcement and finite execution. Everyone has a plan, everyone has a goal, everyone has a vision they're working on. But look around. How many people are actually building something real? How many have the discipline to work when the initial excitement fades? How many can persist through the boring middle, the unglamorous grind, the long stretches where nothing seems to be happening? The ones who can. They're usually quiet. Not because they're secretive, but because they understand something fundamental about energy and focus. They know that every conversation about what they're doing is energy they're not spending on actually doing it. They know that defending their choices to skeptics is time stolen from proving those choices right through action. They know that the hunger for external validation is a trap that keeps you performing instead of producing. What you're about to learn isn't just strategy, it's a fundamental shift in how you approach your entire life. It's about understanding that your power grows in proportion to your ability to work without applause. That your character deepens when you stop performing it and start living it. That your dreams become inevitable when you stop talking about them and start building them in the hidden hours that most people spend seeking comfort. This isn't comfortable wisdom. It won't make you popular at parties. It won't fill your social media with encouraging comments. But it will transform you from someone who plans into someone who does. From someone who talks about change into someone who embodies it. From someone who seeks permission into someone who creates results that need no permission. So, before we go deeper, hit that like button. Drop a comment below. Share this with someone who's tired of talking and ready to build. Subscribe to this channel, and please, don't skip any part of this video. I want you to make a declaration right now in the comments. Write these words: I am the silent architect of my future. Number 1. Silence creates distance between who you are and who you're becoming. There's a gap that exists in every transformation. On one side stands the person you are right now, with all your current limitations, habits, and patterns. On the other side stands the person you're trying to become, the version of you that's achieved the goal, embodied the discipline, broken through to the next level. And between these two versions, there's distance, sacred distance, distance that must be protected. When you announce your transformation too early, you collapse that distance. You invite the old version of yourself to stay present through other people's perceptions. You let everyone who knows you as you were hold you accountable to being that person, even as you're trying to become someone new. Chrysippus, one of the most influential Stoic philosophers, taught that transformation requires what he called assent. It's the moment you fully consent to change, not just intellectually, but at the level of action and identity. But here's the thing about assent: it's fragile in its early stages. It needs protection. It needs space to root deeply before it faces the winds of external opinion. Think about the person who's been overweight their entire life. They've tried diets before, failed before. Everyone knows them as the person who can't stick to it. Then something shifts internally. A true decision gets made, not a wish, not a hope, a decision. And they start to change, quietly, without fanfare, without announcing it to anyone. In that silence, something powerful happens. They're no longer fighting against everyone's memory of who they've always been. They're not defending their new choices to family members who've seen them fail before. They're not managing the skepticism in people's eyes when they order a salad instead of a burger. They're simply becoming someone new, step by step, rep by rep, meal by meal, in the private laboratory of their own life. The distance between who they were and who they're becoming stays protected. And in that protection, transformation accelerates, because they're not trying to be two people at once. The old version for everyone else and the new version for themselves. They're simply becoming the new version consistently, without the cognitive dissonance of performing their old identity while building their new one. This applies to everything. The employee who wants to become an entrepreneur can't straddle both identities publicly. If they're constantly talking about their business idea at their day job, they're inviting judgment, doubt, and the pressure to prove something before it's ready. But if they work in silence, they can fully inhabit their employee identity during work hours while secretly building their entrepreneur identity in the margins, until one day the new identity is strong enough to stand on its own. Psychologists call this identity foreclosure. It happens when other people's perceptions of you become so fixed that changing your identity feels like betraying them. Your family knows you as the responsible one, so pursuing a risky dream feels like letting them down. Your friends know you as the party person, so getting serious about your goals feels like abandoning the group. Your colleagues know you as the steady worker, so showing ambition feels like breaking an unspoken contract. Silence breaks this pattern. It gives you permission to change without asking for permission. It lets you experiment with new versions of yourself without an audience evaluating whether you're doing it right. It creates breathing room between the expectations others have placed on you and the expectations you're placing on yourself. The Stoics understood this deeply. They made a distinction between preferred indifference and what actually matters. Other people's opinions? Indifferent. Your own character and actions. That's what matters. But they also knew human psychology. They knew that even though opinions shouldn't affect you, they do, especially when you're in transition, especially when you're vulnerable, especially when you're not yet certain of your new path. So they advocated for what might seem like withdrawal, but was actually strategic positioning. Work on yourself away from the crowd. Build your character in private. Let your transformation happen in the space where other people's energy can't interfere with your process. There's also neuroscience behind this. Your brain has what researchers call mirror neurons. They fire both when you perform an action and when you observe someone else performing it. But here's what's fascinating. They also fire based on how others perceive you. When someone sees you as your old self, your brain receives signals that reinforce that old identity. When you're surrounded by people who only know the new you, your brain gets reinforcement for the new identity. This is why geographic moves often accompany major life changes. Why people reinvent themselves in new cities. Why starting fresh with people who have no history with you feels so liberating. You're not fighting against the mirror neurons firing based on outdated perceptions. You're allowing your new identity to solidify without the constant gravitational pull of who you used to be. You don't necessarily need to move cities, but you do need to create distance. And silence is how you create that distance while staying exactly where you are. You stop discussing your transformation. You stop defending your new choices. You stop trying to bring everyone along on your journey. You simply work, quietly and consistently, allowing the distance between old you and new you to expand until one day, the new you is the only you that exists. Number 2, the universe rewards conviction, not conversation. There's a law operating in reality that most people never discover. It's not written in textbooks, it's not taught in schools, but it governs outcomes with absolute precision. The universe doesn't respond to your words. It doesn't care about your intentions. It doesn't negotiate with your promises. It only responds to one thing: committed action, sustained over time. Cleanthes, the second head of the Stoic school, was a boxer before he became a philosopher. He understood something about winning that translated perfectly into wisdom. You don't win by announcing your strategy. You win by executing it with such relentless consistency that the outcome becomes inevitable. He worked as a water carrier by night to fund his studies by day, telling no one of his ambitions until he became one of the greatest minds of his era. The universe is always watching what you do, never what you say. It's measuring your conviction through your behavior, not your declarations. Every morning you wake up early when you said you would, the universe takes note. Every time you keep working when no one's watching, the universe registers it. Every moment you choose discipline over comfort in private, you're casting a vote for the reality you want to create. But here's what happens when you talk instead of act. You send mixed signals. Your words say one thing, your behavior says another. And the universe, which only reads behavior, sees hesitation. It sees uncertainty. It sees someone who hasn't fully committed. And uncommitted energy produces uncommitted results. Think about water boiling. At 99 degrees, it's just hot water. All that heat, all that energy, but it hasn't transformed. Then you add one more degree. At 100 degrees, it becomes steam. It transforms. It can power engines. It can move machinery. It can generate electricity. 1 degree of difference creates an entirely different state of matter. Your conviction works the same way. When you're talking about your goals, sharing your plans, seeking encouragement and validation, you're operating at 99 degrees. You're hot, you're active, but you haven't transformed. You're still in the same state. But when you go silent, when you channel every ounce of energy into action, when you stop diluting your focus with conversation, you hit that critical temperature. You transform, and transformed energy creates results that lukewarm intention never could. The ancient Stoics had a practice called proheresis, which roughly translates to moral choice or will. But it meant something deeper than just making decisions. It meant aligning your entire being, thoughts, words, and actions toward a single purpose. When prohairesis is complete, when all three dimensions are pointing the same direction, you become unstoppable. But when your words point one way and your actions another, you create internal friction that bleeds your power. Modern physics calls this coherence. When waves are in phase, aligned, moving together, they amplify each other. A laser is just light waves perfectly aligned, and that alignment makes them powerful enough to cut through steel. But normal light, even bright light, is incoherent. The waves scatter in all directions, cancelling each other out, producing warmth but no cutting power. Your energy is the same. When you're talking, planning, explaining, and announcing, your energy scatters. It goes out in conversation, in defending yourself, in managing people's reactions, in maintaining the image you've created with your words. But when you go silent and pour everything into action, your energy becomes coherent. It aligns, it amplifies, and it cuts through obstacles that seemed impossible when your energy was scattered. There's also something the universe does with sustained conviction that borders on mysterious. Doors open that you didn't know existed. Resources appear that weren't there before. People show up to help at exactly the right moment. Skeptics call it luck or coincidence. But anyone who's experienced it knows it's something else. It's what happens when your commitment becomes so clear, so undeniable, that reality itself seems to reorganize around it. The Stoics would have called this living in accordance with nature, or being in harmony with the logos. They believed that when you align yourself with truth, with virtue, with committed action, you're flowing with the fundamental organizing principle of the universe rather than against it. And when you flow with it rather than against it, life becomes less about forcing and more about allowing. But this only works when your commitment is real. The universe has a perfect detector for fake commitment. It's called results. You can fool people with your words. You can even fool yourself temporarily, but you can't fool reality. Reality only counts what you actually do, and it compounds those actions over time according to laws that are utterly impartial. When you stop announcing and start executing, when you stop talking about who you're going to become and start being that person in the moments no one sees, when you stop seeking permission and start taking responsibility, something shifts in the fabric of your life. Opportunities that seemed closed suddenly open. Obstacles that seemed immovable suddenly shift. Resources that seemed scarce suddenly appear. Not because the universe rewards silence specifically, but because silence is usually where real conviction lives. People who are truly committed are too busy building to broadcast. They're too focused on execution to worry about explanation. They're too invested in results to waste time on rhetoric. The universe doesn't reward your potential. It doesn't reward your intentions. It doesn't reward your promises or your plans or your carefully crafted announcements. It rewards one thing and one thing only: committed action, sustained over time, regardless of who's watching. And that kind of action almost always happens in silence. Here's your moment to commit. Type this in the comments and make it real. My actions speak to the universe louder than my words. Number 3. Privacy is the birthplace of authenticity. Who are you when the camera's off, when the comments are gone, when there's no one to impress, no audience to play to, no narrative to maintain? That person, the one who exists in complete privacy, is the only version of you that's real. Everything else is performance, and performance always costs more than it pays. Musonius Rufus, one of the most practically minded Stoic teachers, believed that philosophy should be lived, not displayed. He taught that the measure of your understanding isn't how well you can discuss virtue, but how you behave when no one's measuring. He would say, the person who has truly learned philosophy has digested it so thoroughly that it disappears into their character. You can't see it anymore as separate from who they are. But we live in an age of mandatory performance. Document your breakfast, share your workout, post your productivity, announce your values, prove your worth, justify your existence through constant content creation. And in all this performance, something essential gets lost. You lose touch with the raw, unedited version of yourself that exists before you shape it for an audience. Privacy isn't about hiding. It's about having a space where you can be completely yourself, without editing, without curating, without translating your experience into something consumable by others. It's in that space that you discover what you actually think, what you actually feel, what you actually value, when no one's approval is on the line. Here's what happens when you live publicly. You start making choices based on how they'll look, rather than how they'll feel. You choose the restaurant that photographs well over the one with the best food. You pick the hobby that sounds impressive over the one that genuinely calls to you. You shape your opinions to match your audience, rather than discovering what you truly believe. Slowly, incrementally, you become a character in a story you're writing for others, instead of a human being living your own life. The ancient Stoics were deeply concerned with this exact problem, though they didn't have social media. They called it living for reputation versus living for virtue. Marcus Aurelius, despite being the most powerful man in the world, constantly reminded himself in his private journals, "What do you think you're doing? Why do you care what these people think?" He was fighting against the natural human tendency to perform for approval rather than act from genuine conviction. But privacy does something else that's equally important. It creates space for failure. Real, messy, embarrassing failure that teaches you things success never could. When you're working publicly, failure is costly. It damages your image. It contradicts your narrative. It makes you look foolish or incompetent. So you avoid it. You play it safe. You stick to what you know works. But in privacy, failure is just information. It's feedback. It's the universe showing you what needs adjustment. You can fail spectacularly, learn the lesson, adjust your approach, and try again without managing anyone's perception of you. This is where real growth happens, not in the carefully curated highlights you show the world, but in the private laboratory where you're free to experiment, to break things, to discover through trial and error. Neuroscientists have found that our brains process experiences differently depending on whether we're being observed. When we know someone's watching, our prefrontal cortex activates more strongly. We become more self-conscious, more careful, more deliberate, but we also become less creative, less spontaneous, less capable of the kind of free-flowing exploration that leads to breakthroughs. Privacy shuts off that observer effect. It lets your brain work the way it evolved to work, without the constant monitoring of how you're being perceived. Ideas flow more freely, connections form more naturally. You stumble into insights you would never have reached through careful, observed thinking. There's also something sacred about having parts of your life that belong only to you, experiences that aren't translated into content, achievements that exist only in your memory, struggles that you processed alone without turning them into a public narrative. These private moments, these untranslated experiences, they become the bedrock of your actual identity rather than your performed identity. The Stoics talked about the inner citadel, a fortress of self that no external force could breach. But you can't build that citadel in public. You can't develop genuine self-reliance while constantly checking the reactions of others. You can't discover your authentic values while performing values you think will earn approval. The inner citadel is built in privacy, in the moments when you're accountable only to yourself. This doesn't mean you never share anything. It doesn't mean you live like a hermit or refuse all connection. It means you maintain a clear boundary between what's private and what's public. It means you protect certain experiences, certain processes, certain parts of yourself from the distorting effect of being turned into content. Because here's the truth. The moment you share something, you change your relationship to it. The experience becomes a story. The struggle becomes a narrative. The achievement becomes a post. And stories, narratives, and posts are all shaped for an audience. They're edited, they're framed, they're interpreted, and in that translation from private experience to public content, something essential is always lost. What's lost is authenticity, not the performed authenticity that's so popular now, where people share their real struggles in carefully crafted ways, but actual authenticity, the kind that exists only in private, the kind that no one sees but you, the kind that forms the foundation of genuine character rather than curated personality. When you reclaim privacy, when you create sacred space that belongs only to you, you give yourself permission to be fully human again. Messy, contradictory, growing, failing, learning, not as content for others to consume, but as a living, breathing person discovering what it means to be alive. Let's make this official. Leave a comment right now declaring, "My private self is my truest self." Number 4. Momentum multiplies in the shadows. There's a phenomenon in physics called accumulated potential. It's what happens when energy builds, layer upon layer, pressure upon pressure, force upon force, without release. A river behind a dam. Tectonic plates pressing against each other. A seed swelling beneath the soil. For a while, nothing visible happens. No movement, no drama, no evidence that anything significant is occurring. Then suddenly the dam releases, the earthquake hits, the seedling breaks through, and the accumulated force transforms everything in an instant. Your silent work operates on the same principle. While you're building in private, while nothing seems to be happening, while everyone else appears to be moving faster because they're announcing every step, you're accumulating something they're not. You're building momentum that doesn't dissipate. You're creating pressure that will eventually become unstoppable. Zeno of Citium, the founder of Stoicism, taught his students on a painted porch in Athens, but before that, he spent years studying in silence. He absorbed wisdom from multiple schools of thought. He worked through contradictions. He developed his philosophy in the quiet spaces between teachers, in the private hours of contemplation. When he finally began teaching, his ideas emerged fully formed, powerful, coherent. They changed the world. But that power was built in obscurity. Here's what most people don't understand about momentum. It's fragile in the beginning. Those first few days of a new habit, those initial attempts at a skill, those early stages of a business or project. The momentum is there, but it's delicate. It needs protection. And every time you talk about it, every time you expose it to external energy, you risk breaking the spell. Think about a spinning top. When it first starts, it's wobbly, unstable, easy to knock over. But as it spins faster, as momentum builds, it becomes stable. It becomes hard to disrupt. Eventually it's spinning so fast that you can barely touch it without it correcting itself. Your work in silence is like that. You're building spin velocity without disruption, letting momentum accumulate until it reaches the point where external forces can't slow it down. But when you announce early, when you seek validation before momentum has built, you're inviting disruption. Every skeptical comment is a finger touching the top while it's still wobbly. Every doubt someone plants is friction slowing your spin. Every question you have to answer is energy diverted from the work of building velocity. The Stoics had a concept they called cataleptic impressions, which were clear, undeniable perceptions of truth. But they acknowledged that not all impressions are cataleptic. Some are confused, some are distorted by emotion or desire or external influence. They taught their students to test impressions privately, to examine them in the quiet of their own minds before accepting them as true. Your momentum needs the same private examination. You need time to test whether this path is real before you invite others to judge it. You need space to build confidence in your direction before you have to defend it to skeptics. You need the freedom to pivot, to adjust, to discover what actually works without the weight of public commitment to a specific approach. Here's something fascinating that happens in the shadows. You develop instinct. When you're working publicly, you're always second-guessing. Is this good enough to share? What will people think? How does this fit the narrative I've created? But when you're working privately, you start trusting your gut. You make decisions based on what feels right, what the work requires, what your intuition tells you, rather than what will look good or sound impressive. And intuition is exponentially faster than analysis. It processes information your conscious mind can't access. It sees patterns before they're obvious. It guides you towards solutions that logic alone would never reach. But intuition only develops in privacy, in the space where you're making decisions for the work itself, rather than for an audience's reaction to the work. Research on expertise shows that masters in any field develop what psychologists call chunking. They don't process information piece by piece anymore. They see whole patterns instantly. A chess master doesn't analyze each piece. They see positions. A musician doesn't think about each note. They hear phrases. But this only develops through massive private practice, through thousands of hours working when no one's watching, when there's no performance pressure, when it's just you and the work. Your momentum in the shadows creates the same effect. You're not just accumulating hours, you're developing mastery at a level that public work can't match. Because public work is always partially performative. You're always aware of the audience, but private work is pure. It's you and the challenge, you and the craft, you and the goal. No mediation, no translation, no performance. There's also a psychological advantage to momentum built in private. When you finally do emerge, when you finally show what you've created, people are shocked. They wonder how you did it so fast. They don't see the accumulated hours, the built-up pressure, the momentum that's been multiplying in the shadows. They only see the result, which seems to appear suddenly, almost magically. But you know the truth. You know that what looks sudden to them is the result of sustained effort they never saw. You know that the pressure that finally burst through was building slowly, consistently, in the hidden places where real work happens. You know that momentum, real momentum, the kind that changes lives and creates lasting results, always multiplies in the shadows before it manifests in the light. I need you to own this truth. Go to the comments and write, "My unseen momentum is becoming unstoppable." Number 5. Silence teaches you to trust yourself above all others. There's a moment that comes to everyone who builds in silence. It's the moment when you realize you've stopped looking over your shoulder for approval. You've stopped measuring your progress against other people's timelines. You've stopped needing someone else to tell you that you're on the right path. You just know, not with arrogance, not with false confidence, but with a quiet, unshakable certainty that comes from having proven something to the only person whose opinion ultimately matters, yourself. Epictetus taught, "He who is in harmony with himself is in harmony with the universe, but harmony with yourself isn't something you can find by polling your friends or checking social media for validation. It's discovered in the silence, in the space between your decision and your action, where no other voice exists except your own. Most people never develop real self-trust because they never give themselves the chance. They're always checking, always asking, always seeking confirmation from external sources before they believe in their own judgment. Do you think this is a good idea? Does this look right? Am I making the right choice? Each question, each seeking of outside validation is a small betrayal of your own inner knowing. Here's what happens in that betrayal. You teach your brain that you can't be trusted, that your instincts aren't reliable, that you need others to confirm reality for you. Over time, your decision-making muscles atrophy. The mental pathways that connect you to your own wisdom begin to fade. You become dependent on external validation the way a muscle becomes dependent on a brace, growing weaker the more you rely on something outside yourself for support. But silence forces a different development. When you're building alone, when you've committed to not seeking outside input during the crucial formation phase, you have no choice but to trust yourself. You make a decision, you take action, you see results, you adjust, you decide again, you act again, and with each cycle, you're strengthening that internal guidance system. The Stoics called this developing your hegemonicon, your ruling faculty, your command center. It's the part of you that observes, evaluates, chooses, and acts. Marcus Aurelius wrote that nothing can harm this ruling faculty except itself. No external force can corrupt it unless you give permission. But that protection only works when you've built it strong, when you've exercised it enough in private that it doesn't collapse under external pressure. Think about learning to ride a bicycle. At first, you need training wheels. You need someone holding the back of the seat. You need external support. But there comes a moment when those supports have to come off. There's a moment of terror when you realize no one's holding you anymore. You're balancing on your own. And in that moment, you either trust yourself or you fall. And falling isn't the failure. Never trying to ride without support is the failure. Your goals, your dreams, your transformation, they require the same leap. At some point, you have to remove the training wheels of constant validation. You have to let go of the need for others to confirm every choice. You have to trust that you've prepared enough, learned enough, grown enough to navigate without constant external input. And that trust only develops when you actually practice navigating alone. Neuroscience reveals something powerful here. Your brain has what's called the default mode network, which activates when you're not focused on external tasks. It's where self-reflection happens, where you consolidate learning, where you integrate experiences into understanding. But this network only activates in quiet, in solitude, in the absence of external stimulation. When you're constantly seeking outside input, you never give this network time to operate. You never give your brain the space to develop its own models of reality. Silence provides that space. In the quiet hours of working alone, your default mode network is processing everything. It's building internal maps. It's creating decision-making frameworks based on your direct experience rather than other people's theories. It's developing what we might call wisdom, which is different from knowledge. Knowledge is information you receive from outside. Wisdom is understanding you develop from within. The ancient Stoics made a crucial distinction between catalepsis and doxa. Catalepsis is clear comprehension, direct understanding, perception so accurate that it leaves no room for doubt. Doxa is opinion, the uncertain beliefs we hold without direct verification. When you build in silence, testing your ideas through action rather than discussion, you develop catalepsis. You know because you've directly experienced. But when you're constantly seeking others' input, you accumulate doxa. You hold beliefs because someone told you, not because you verified them yourself. There's also something profound that happens to your relationship with failure when you trust yourself. Failure stops being this catastrophic event that proves you were wrong to try. Instead, it becomes information, just data. Your internal guidance system made a prediction, reality responded differently, and now you have better information for the next decision. There's no shame in it, because there's no audience judging it. There's just you, learning, adjusting, improving. This is the ultimate freedom. Not needing anyone's permission to try, not needing anyone's validation to persist, not needing anyone's approval to know you're on the right path. Just you and reality in direct conversation, building trust with yourself through the only method that actually works, showing up consistently and proving to yourself that you're reliable. When you finally emerge from the silence with results, people will ask how you knew it would work. And the honest answer is, you didn't. Not with certainty, but you trusted yourself enough to find out. You trusted your ability to handle whatever came. You trusted that even if it didn't work exactly as planned, you'd learn, adapt, and ultimately succeed. And that trust, built in the quiet hours when no one was watching, is the most valuable asset you'll ever develop. This is your declaration of independence. Comment these powerful words. I trust myself more than I need others' approval. So, here's where we stand. You've walked through these 5 truths, and now you understand something most people will never grasp. Silence isn't weakness. It's strategy. It's protection. It's power concentrated instead of scattered. It's you choosing to invest your energy where it actually compounds rather than where it evaporates into empty conversation. The Stoics didn't create this philosophy to make life harder. They created it to make you stronger, to help you see through the illusions that trap most people in cycles of announcement without achievement, intention without action, performance without substance. They understood that the gap between who you say you are and who you actually are is where all your power gets lost. But now you know how to close that gap. Work in silence, build in private, trust yourself more than you need validation. Let momentum accumulate in the shadows. Protect the sacred distance where transformation happens. And when the time comes, when the work is done, let your results be so undeniable that no explanation is necessary and no defense is required. This isn't theory. This is how extraordinary lives get built. Not through announcements and applause, but through silent consistency that eventually becomes impossible to ignore. Not through seeking permission, but through creating results that need no permission. Not through performing transformation, but through actually transforming when no one's watching. The world doesn't need more talkers. It needs more doers. More people who understand that real power whispers while weakness shouts. More people who trust the process enough to work without an audience. More people who know that focus in silence always leads to winning in public. You are capable of becoming that person. Not someday, starting right now. Close your mouth, open your hands, get to work, and let your life become the proof that silence, real silence combined with relentless action, is the most powerful force in the universe. Now go build something worthy of the silence that protected it. If this message hit home, smash that like button. Drop your affirmation in the comments below. Share this with someone who's ready to stop talking and start building. And subscribe to this channel because we're just getting started on this journey and you'll want every piece of wisdom we're bringing your way. One final declaration before you go. Seal this commitment in the comments. Silence is my strategy. Action is my language.